There is a paradigm shift happening in biology and neuroscience away from the idea that life and consciousness are somehow encoded in DNA.
Our understanding of DNA is that of a protein factory. What we like to think, or have liked to think so far, is that if you have a brick factory, you explain Cologne's cathedral. Well, no, you have the bricks, but something has to know how to put those bricks together in the right way, so you get Cologne's cathedral. Living organisms have a coherent, associated, holistic organizing plan.
I sat down with Bernardo Kastrup to make sense of the groundbreaking work of Michael Levin and Christof Koch, who are revolutionizing the fields of biology and neuroscience.
So we have now tools where you can literally see, for example, the electric face. This pre-pattern that tells you where should the eye go, how many should there be, where should the mouth be.
What's going on here is more than just DNA. It comes from an archetypal level.
Classically, science assumes that out of matter, life and consciousness emerge. Now, the work of Michael Levin and Christof Koch takes a more holistic view, in which life and consciousness are not a simple emergent phenomenon, not a computation of genes and molecules.
Consciousness, according to IIT, ultimately is the only thing that it's absolute existence. It's not a computation. It does not arise from mere computation being performed.
Now, Bernardo Kastrup thinks that Christof Koch's integrated information theory might be our first accurate scientific theory of consciousness.
As far as we can get, I think IIT is by far the best game in town.
Welcome to the Essentia Foundation's YouTube channel, and thank you so much for watching. This video is a deep dive into two theories that might be a bit challenging to understand. Now, what's good to know is that I have previously held two full-length conversations with both Michael Levin and Christof Koch that you can watch here. What's new in this video is that with the director of the Essentia Foundation, philosopher Bernardo Kastrup, I talk about the philosophical implication of Michael Levin's bioelectric fields and Christof Koch's integrated information theory. And as you will find out, both theories are highly compatible with analytic idealism, the notion that our universe is fundamentally conscious. Now, without further ado, here is my conversation with Bernardo Kastrup. You, of course, connected me to Michael Levin. Do you still remember when you came across his work and how it sort of impacted
it's been a while ago. That was over 10 years ago. I think they published, Michael and his team published a paper in 2013 about memory in planaria, these little flat aquatic worms that have a head with a nervous system entirely in their heads. All their neurons are in their heads. But they have this peculiar property that if you slice a planaria, even if you decapitate a planaria, the head grows a new body, but the body that is sliced off grows a new head. And what they did was they put a bunch of planaria in an aquarium with a substrate, complex structure in the substrate that the planaria needed to navigate to find food. And they trained the planaria to navigate that labyrinth, so to say, that maze to find food. And the planaria learned it, so they could find food very quickly. And then they proceeded to decapitate the planaria, so remove their neurons, the entire nervous system, waited 2 weeks until the planaria grew a new head with a new nervous system, clean from scratch. They put the planaria in the aquarium again to see if the planaria still remembered how to navigate the maze and find food. And lo and behold, the planaria remembered. So that's, of course, in science, we need experiments to be reproduced and results confirmed. But what that experiment shows is that whatever memories are, they are not encoded in the nervous system. That's not how memories work. They are not little files inside the thumb drive in here. Yeah. That's not what it is.
Yeah, and the same goes for sort of the when planaria with two heads that he grew. If you cut off the head again, the next generation will also grow a second head, whereas the alteration is not in the DNA. So
yeah, you can alter the electrochemical environment around the living being, and their morphological organizing principles will express themselves differently. which is mind-boggling because we like to boil everything down to DNA. But our understanding of DNA is that of a protein factory.
Yeah.
It's basically a brick factory. It's a factory that produces all the bricks you need.
Yeah.
And what we like to think, or have liked to think so far, is that if you have a brick factory, you explain Cologne's cathedral. Well, no, you have the bricks, but something has to know how to put those bricks together in the right way, so you get Cologne's cathedral. And what Michael is doing is he's providing us an account with a lot of experimental evidence to back it up. Not strong experimental evidence only, but flabbergasting experimental evidence that takes you aback to show that what's going on here is more than just DNA. How does the cell on the tip of your thumb know to be an epithelial cell, and the cell inside your head knows to be a neuron? Because they all come from stem cells. Yeah. They all came from one zygote, one fertilized egg, right? So how do they know what to do and how to behave and what to look like depending on where they are? That's morphogenesis. How does this form emerge? And what it seems to suggest is that there are macro level immanent organizing principles in nature that define morphogenesis. There may be archetypal templates in nature, if you want to call it that way, that inform the form of life. In other words, that inform life. Fred Matter uses this way of using words, and he's great for this. The founder of Essential Foundation, Fred Matter, says, how do you inform life? How do you bring form into life? Yeah. So there may be these fundamental organizing templates that are immanent in nature, immanent in life, that express themselves in the form of these fields that tell life how to structure itself.
It's crazy. It's like blueprints. And of course, Levin himself also talks about a sort of a platonic realm of form, right? That's what it's sort of hinting at.
Yeah, that's philosophy, and he's doing science. But of course, as an intelligent, critical thinking human being, once he is confronted with the evidence his lab is producing, of course, he's trying to understand it metaphysically as well, right? So his scientific work is not metaphysically biased in any way. But Michael, as an intelligent human being trying to make sense of life, the universe, and everything, of course, he's forced to go into those, Platonic directions to make sense of what he's seeing in front of him. Planaria with two heads and the same DNA. What the hell's going on?
And the power of Levin is that you shouldn't talk about philosophy in a sense, because it's just the sheer experimental work he's doing is so mesmerizing already. He talks about something I think also value, and he brings it up in the interview I did with him, sort of that he doesn't believe in sort of these categories, right? He really sees intelligence, and he speaks more often about intelligence than consciousness. Also would like to see how you read his work in that regard, the difference between intelligence and consciousness, but he sees it as a scale, right? So, and he's interested in how it scales up, because we all originate from one cell, and we're sitting here right now, and how did that scale up, that intelligence? And how did those cells, and he calls it a mind melt, so this sort of association, right, to a bigger organism.
Yeah. Michael and me, we do have a difference, slight difference in emphasis. My impression, and Michael, if you're watching this, forgive me if I'm misrepresenting you, but my impression is that he tends to think more bottom up. How do cells as elementary building blocks come together and subsume themselves into a greater organism like a human being or a frog or even a planarium. I tend to have a more top-down view of life. I don't see life as an aggregate of cells. I see all life as the original zygote, the original fertilized egg that all life always was. And I see that zygote just creating internal structure in a fractal way. That zygote is a cell, knows how to be a cell, so it creates internal structure by applying that cell template to itself until it grows into a multicellular organism. But I tend to see growth as a form of creating internal structure in an entity that is holistic from the beginning and never ceases to be holistic, and therefore every life is a holistic system. Michael, because of his life, the way he's experimenting with things, he takes the other perspective, which is also valid. It's a matter of how far each perspective can bring you, which is how cells come together to cohere together and form a complex multicellular organism. I justify my view by saying that no organism has ever been created by pasting cells together. Every organism on the planet has always grown from a cell. But of course, he has created these artificial organisms in which he has taken multiple cells together and just pasted them together. And lo and behold, they behave like an organism.
Yeah, that's the Zenobots. The Zenobots, they're taking stem cells from a frog.
Yeah.
That he just first sought to come to a shape. He used AI there, right, to find the right shape of a sort of cellular automata, you could say, and then he used sort of these bioelectric fields to instruct it, right? Or
to do a certain task, like moving in a circle. And lo and behold, they do that.
Yeah, and we've talked more often about sort of the origin of life and that we're far from it, but this gets like pretty close in the sense that he still needs a stem cell, but from there on, he's now able to create an organism.
A Xenobot.
And it's still small, but I mean, where is this heading? And
he knows how to mobilize this immanent organizing templates in nature to give a coherent form even to an aggregate of cells, as if it were really a holistic living being that came from a zygote. It didn't. It's an aggregate of cells, but he can hack into these fields, these organizing principles, to bring behavioral coherence to what otherwise is an aggregate of cells. So he's tapping into something fundamental and immanent in nature, which can be characterized as a realm of archetypes, the basic templates of form and behavior. And if you hack into that, it takes over. Even things that are aggregates of cells, it takes them over.
And then, because that's how he titled the video, a bit sensational, did he tell cancer cells to stop? Because in frog, he has been able to via influencing bioelectric fields to stop sort of formation of cancer cells.
Yeah. So he took human cancer cells.
He did it even with human cells.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe it's human epithelial cancer cells, if I remember correctly.
Oh, that's right. He injected those in a frog, and then he managed to stop them.
Yeah, and those cells had clear genetic defects. Yeah. So the DNA was damaged. It was really cancerous and irreversibly cancerous cells. And the experiment was you put them in a frog. If you don't do anything else, they take over the frog and kill the frog. But in his case, he put those genetically damaged cancer cells, very aggressive, in a frog, and he manipulated the bioelectric fields in such a way that the cancer couldn't manifest itself, which brings up the possibility that has empirical substantiation. I'll tell you what previous empirical substantiation it had. That yes, you need genetic errors during mitosis. When you are copying DNA, you need an error to happen in that copying mechanism. But it's not enough. It is the holistic organizing principle that governs the body as a whole. That has to be faulty too. Otherwise, you just get the brick factory not producing good bricks, but it doesn't take over Cologne Cathedral. You just get bad bricks and they stay where they are. So something else needs to go wrong at a holistic level. And of course, that's what holistic medicine practitioners have been saying for a long time. They just couldn't substantiate it. Yeah. But, there is evidence from many years ago. They did the autopsies in people who died in traffic accidents, which give you a completely unbiased sample of the population, because everybody dies in traffic accidents, young and old, healthy and unhealthy, of all ethnicities. So they did autopsies in those bodies, and about 50% of people, irrespective of age, anything else, totally unbiased, about 50% of people had minor cancer tumors, irrespective of age. Because it turns out that, it appears, if that study is correct, it appears that we all, throughout our lives, develop cancer, but it goes nowhere. Of course, if you do a full body scan and you find it, you will treat it.
Sort of this on this holistic level in the code, there
We
are
all
sort
get
of
it.
errors. We all get them.
Yeah. And the difference is which of these mini tumors actually develop and become problematic. There is good reason for doctors to say, don't do a full body scan, because you always find something. And if you find, you treat it, even if it's actually not going anywhere. So this plays into Michael's hypothesis of this holistic bioelectric field with this immanent organizing principles. If the field is doing okay, even if you get a transcription error in your DNA and you get cancer cells, they go nowhere because they still obey the dirigent. How do I say this?
The director, or no? What's it called in English?
The conductor. And even if you're a defective music player, you still follow the maestro. You'll not be able to play well, but you're not going to take over the symphony. You're not going to disrupt the whole thing. But when something at a holistic level, when those organizing principles themselves are in some way disrupted or weak or whatever, then you get the actual expression. And here I can say this with confidence because I discussed this with Michael before more than once. We think of this break in the coherence of the field as a form of dissociation. It's when cancer cells no longer are looking at the conductor. They start doing their own thing.
Play their own tune.
And then you have real cancer because they are dissociated from the rest of the body plan. So mentally, if
dissonant in an orchestra. They're playing dissonant.
And then they disrupt the whole orchestra. So in the hypothesis that the body is what mental states look like, cancer is an internal dissociation. It's when part of your mental inner life becomes dissociated from the rest of it. And when you get a dissociation, you get a false sense of individual identity. Like people with dissociative identity disorder, they have these multiple personalities. One of them claims, I am a 5-year-old child and I'm female. The other claims that he is a 60-year-old male. And they all think they're right. And they all do their own thing. They don't obey the host personality's goals and plans anymore. They go off on their own tangents because they are dissociated. They can't reach each other's inner lives anymore. They are separate. So they go off on a tangent thinking that they are the entity. When cancer is when a dissociation happens, that's my hypothesis. Michael is not, he will not positively state this as fact, but he's open to this hypothesis.
Well, he did say that he did say to me, I think that cells sort of forget themselves and identify with these higher goals.
It's a cognitive dissonance.
He will sort of use language like that, but basically he is saying the same thing, that those cancer cells forgot sort of the organism. They think of themselves as a single cell again, and then your next cell is an enemy now. Well,
an enemy, but at least you don't care about it.
Outside, you're outside. It's not sort of
So you grow as a tumor because you want to extend your empire. You're not part of a bigger entity. Now you're your own thing. So you do your own thing, and that's exactly what cancer does. Michael uses the language of cognitive glue. So he speaks of these fields as the cognitive glue. It's a very idealist terminology, it's the cognitive glue that allows the cells to sort of cognitively understand each other and cooperate cognitively. And when there is a cognitive dissociation, when they cannot cognitively bridge that gap between themselves, then on the one side of dissociation, they go off on their own. They do their own thing. And that's exactly what cancer tumors are. They create their own vascular system. They use as much energy as they can get from the body. They don't obey the body plan. They create their own structures. So it takes more than a problem in the brick factory. You need a cognitive dissociation at the level of the entire bioplan, so to say.
And I, of course, directly had sort of these exotic ideas of where that bioelectric field is then, where those forms are stored. And Michael Levin sort of brought me a bit down to earth. There is a lot to be said already in molecular biology on sort of the just the bioelectricity that we know, right? To what degree can sort of just the physics and the biology we know, molecular biology, can account for this? And where do you think it really points to something beyond that we really don't yet understand?
I don't think we will be able to ultimately account for everything in terms of measurable physical properties, because I don't think the dashboard is complete. I don't think physicality tells us everything about all the causal organizing principles of the noumenal world, the world as it is in itself. It's an incomplete appearance, an incomplete image. So I don't think we can close that causally at the level of known physical stuff. But we can clearly go a long way in that direction. And we may even be able to establish empirically that certain things work, even if we don't understand exactly how they work. That has been the history of science, by the way, and the history of technology at least. Technologists don't care about truth. What they care is about what works, right? So I think we are not far. Okay, I'll make a big statement now. I think we are not far from figuring out how to cure all forms of cancer. Not cure, let me rephrase it. We are not far from turning every form of cancer into a chronic illness. An illness you have for the rest of your life but will not kill you. Like allergies. Oh, darn, you have it. Okay, you do certain things every now and then, like that frog that Michael gave cancer to, forced the bioelectric fields to maintain their coherence in the presence of cancer. The cancer didn't develop. I think the frog is still alive. It's been a couple of years.
Wow.
So maybe you need to do maintenance. Maybe every year you need to go to the hospital so they can boost your fields. And I think that will happen. And I think it's largely coming from Michael's work and the students that will become professors a few years from now.
And sort of we spoke about sort of then the dissociation process, which could sort of account for the growth of cancer cells, but the association, sort of those cells that add up to a bigger organism, how does that inform your work? Has it informed your work, and how much are you on a similar path here as Michael?
I think association is the fundamental force in nature, because I'm an analytic idealist. I reduce everything to one field of subjectivity, one mind. I think everything can be explained in terms of the patterns of excitation of this one mind, this one field of subjectivity. All of nature can be explained in terms of that. That means that ultimately everything is actually one. It's one mind, one field of subjectivity. And you need an active process to stop that from recognizing itself as one. A dissociative process. It may be an actively enforced process in the case of life. It may be a spontaneous process, which is what IIT predicts, integrated information theory, predicts that sometimes a unified psychic complex will integrate more information if it sheds off some parts of it. It will be a stronger complex, richer, by shedding off some parts of it that are not contributing much, are just diluting the amount of integrated information. Then you get a spontaneous form of dissociation, not an actively enforced one, but it's still something that needs to happen. It's not the way things start. It needs to happen. So to me, the natural direction of things is associative, because that's the fundamental nature of things. That's how things are at the bottom level.
It relates to entropy, right? Because we will die sitting here and we'll associate again with a larger consciousness. So that also relates to entropy. But still then, to what degree does nature chooses to dissociate, and how?
I'm not sure it chooses. I think it happens.
I know. Of course, you don't want to apply sort of teleology there. You want to, but still, and that's so fascinating that in nature it has these clear boundaries, and that's what Levin, what we said earlier, right? It knows, okay, I'm going to sort of associate right until this point, and then I stop, and that's fascinating, right?
It is nature telling us what is actually natural and intuitive. And that contradicts our intuitions, because our intuitions are born out of culture. not nature. Well, culture is ultimately natural. But of course, we inject and have injected a lot of noise for the past 30,000 years because we replace reality with discourse and narratives and language. So our natural intuitions of plausibility drift away from nature towards self-made stuff, stories.
Yeah.
And this is nature telling us what is actually natural. What is natural is that living organisms have a coherent, associated, holistic organizing plan that is immanent in them. Yeah. And it's always there. It comes from an archetypal level of nature. Under analytic idealism, it's just nature as it is, because archetypes are mental templates of behavior. Under analytic idealism, everything is mental. So of course there is this archetypal realm. It is what there is. It's all
so
there is.
So that's homecoming for you. So Michael Levin's work, and that's no surprise. I get that. On sort of how Michael thinks about consciousness versus intelligence, I know he also sent me a paper on AI, his view on AI, and he doesn't fundamentally see a difference. He sees it sort of as just an evolution and a sort of how we raise our kids, that sort of you just have to tell them so much and they really have to learn. And he doesn't see a fundamental difference there between AI and just carbon-based intelligence. And also, when it comes to consciousness, I couldn't really pin him down on a definition, and he more sees evolution as sort of a process to create problem-solving agents. He will use words like that, like in a problem-solving space, how much can an agent solve? And the higher the degree, he then says, okay, it's more intelligence, and that scales up in our universe, and there's no upper boundary. But consciousness, phenomenal consciousness, doesn't really seem to enter his work. He's not a philosopher. But how do you see all of this? I mean, his view on intelligence and how it relates to consciousness.
Yeah, now it's tricky because I may be privy to certain views Michael may hold, which are not in his published work, and now I don't know how to distinguish them. But I'll say this: we come from the two opposite extremes of this spectrum. I come from computer engineering and computer science. He comes from biology.
Yeah.
But curiously, I give biology a more fundamental role than he does. And he gives computers a more fundamental role than I do, which is where we sort of cross each other, right?
Maybe because both of you can project sort of you can project stuff into it because you don't know it, well enough.
We don't know enough. Yeah, it could be. But I see private consciousness, like human beings have, like living beings have. I see that as eminently associated with biology. And I cannot refute that a computer may have private consciousness, but I don't think we have any good reasons to think that, any more than we have good reasons to think that this glass of water has private consciousness. I don't think there is even a glass of water. It's an artificial carving out of nature that we do for convenience.
Yeah.
So I see things more top-down. It starts with one mind. That mind dissociates itself actively in the form of living beings. And what the dissociation looks like is biology. It's metabolism, which is different from anything else going on in nature. There is nothing remotely like metabolism out there. Yeah. And metabolism only happens in life. It's the definition of life. So I see that top down. And therefore, things that don't look like biology, to me, give me no reason to think that they have private conscious inner life of their own. I think their inner life is subsumed into the inner life of the inanimate universe as a whole. So yes, the matter in the computer is the appearance of mental states, but that doesn't mean that the computer has a private conscious inner life of its own. It doesn't mean that the computer is the appearance of a dissociated outer. It only means that the conscious states underlying the computer are the conscious states of the inner life of the inanimate universe as a whole. Again, a top-down view. I sense from Michael that he has a more bottom-up view. It's like things can cognitively glue together, things that were not born as part of the same organism, things that are fundamentally distinct, like a piece of matter here, a piece of matter there, even pieces of biology, but maybe also pieces of silicon. And if you put them together in the right way, their conscious inner life subsumes. And glues and aggregates and forms an organism top down. That's how he sees it.
He also doesn't see an upper scale there in a sense, because he said, I'm open to the idea, of course, that was sort of a speculative bit in our conversation, where he said, I'm open to the idea of the weather being sort of conscious or as an intelligent system. I just wouldn't have a way now to test it. So we should just test it, come up with tests to see if it can solve problems.
Yeah. He doesn't give preeminence to metabolism.
No, exactly.
Which is curious, because he's a biologist.
Yeah. He gives,
and it's equally curious that I do that, and I don't give preeminence to silicon.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Since that despite the fact that I'm a computer engineer.
That's funny. It's real funny. Yeah. But that's also nice for the two of you to meet, right? And you have had interesting conversations. Both of you should continue doing so, I think.
I think his profession is much more preeminent than mine. But he doesn't think so. He gives my profession the same preeminence that he gives to his.
Yeah.
It's curious, isn't it?
It is really curious, yeah. And he does focus very much on behavior, because he focuses on sort of this problem solving of these agents and then how it scales up and all of that. But it is very much focused and not on the inner life of what that problem solving agent experiences in doing so, right? So, and this is maybe a nice bridge to neuroscience, because
IIT gives an answer.
Yeah.
It may not be the correct answer, but it gives a precise answer.
It does have a measure. And a bridge, I thought just a moment ago when we spoke about this, is that at this table, I had a wonderful conversation with Christof Koch. And during our conversation, he talked about sort of this graph, what we're used to evolutionarily speaking, that sort of on the y-axis, say we have consciousness and here we have intelligence. And then evolutionarily speaking, we're used to a line like this. We see all organisms that are more intelligent, they're more conscious, and up to us humans. So we're so used to that graph. And now, and he has IIT can see something about sort of that relationship, right? And Michael Levin focuses very much on intelligence, but I think he's also makes somehow the assumption that line goes like that. Whereas IIT says, no, we have a theory, we propose a theory that we can measure that the system might be super intelligent, so it might be here, but it's still super low on consciousness. Yeah. And Koch wants to make the world aware of that. Okay, guys, wake up. We're in sort of, that's what's new about AI. It's not that it's becoming conscious, that we are now for the first time in our evolution faced with entities that have a
high intelligence,
super high intelligence,
and no phi. Well, some phi. Everything.
So you
has
agree
some
with
phi,
this analysis of Koch?
Yeah. I think IIT is not a metaphysics, so it's not explaining how consciousness arises from something unconscious.
No.
It's not even making that assumption that consciousness arises at all. It's more, actually, in my view, it's more consistent with IIT to think of consciousness as fundamental. But what IIT gives us is the structure and organization of conscious states. How do they come together? How they split from each other? What kind of conscious structure do they form?
Yeah.
And that's based on some 5 simple axioms, which are incredibly intuitive. At least 3 of them are incredibly intuitive. And there is a theoretical, there's theoretical tooling built to substantiate IIT that allows us, given enough measurements, to calculate what that structure will look like. And it's given by the amount of information that a certain configuration integrates.
Yeah.
And it postulates that it will always try to integrate as much information as possible, which is empirically true from an introspective perspective. We always experience unitary consciousness.
Yeah.
Right? We don't break apart unless we undergo dissociative identity disorder.
That's one of the axioms, that an experience is always a whole or one experience. I'm not saying it's just not 2 Bernardos, it's just
correct.
One.
Yeah. There is one thing it is like to be a IIT complex.
Yeah.
Always one thing.
Yeah.
And it can be richer or less rich, but it's entirely defined.
Yeah.
And by using this axiom that you're always trying to maximize integrated information, that axiom alone, you have to believe that.
Yeah.
And the reason to believe that is that it seems to be like that from an introspective perspective, right?
Yeah.
So, but you do need a small leap of faith. That's why it's called an axiom.
But for people to understand that we always want to integrate or maximize the integrated information, sort of for people just to understand what are we really saying there?
What you are conscious of in yourself is always the maximum integrated information complex. And evolutionarily, it makes sense. You always want to have as much information as possible to steer your life and to make your conscious choices, your deliberations, and your conscious decisions. But sometimes you integrate more information by letting things fall off. That has to do with attention. You know, if there is music blasting, you're trying to do your tax filing. Now, you integrate more information if you turn down the music. So our mental processes spontaneously do the same through the mechanism of attention. You sort of screen out, shut off things that are actually reducing information integration, because although they also have information, they lead to a dilution of the information that is actually being integrated in reentrant loops of the system. So if you accept that, and there are very reasonable arguments to accept that, but you have to accept that. Once you accept that, everything else follows. Through the theoretical instrumentation built to substantiate IIT, you can precisely calculate what will be the maximum phi. And you can predict when we will spontaneously dissociate through attention. You can predict, for instance, non-trivial things like there is an insight from IIT that I find incredibly important, which is there is no perception without interpretation. You never simply perceive and then interpret, because the maximum phi complex will be the one that integrates interpretational states with perceptual states. So this lines up with Thomas Kuhn. Now, there is no neutral data. Data is always laden with interpretation. And this arises naturally out of IIT. If you run the numbers, that's what you will get.
Yeah, and it could be that we have a system that sort of computationally, when you look at our sort of output of its information, seems to be not very intelligent, but does have sort of high integration. Perhaps a bacterium, right, will already have pretty significant phi.
A lot more than an AI computer.
Exactly, where we see, and that brings us back to that axis, right? When then you would have like a very high intelligence. So when you look at the output, you're like, the thing is super intelligent. But when we measure the integrated information, it's super low, right?
Yeah, super low. Look at your video of bacteria.
Yeah.
And every second that would lead to an incredibly low signal to noise ratio, as we call it. Noise would be enormous and the signal very low.
Interesting. Yeah.
So to keep the signal to noise ratio high, you want to keep things always separated, non-integrated, until you actually want to integrate them in that precise way you want to integrate them.
Yeah.
And it turned out that precise way always entails very low information integration, because otherwise we monkeys can't design the system. It becomes too complex. We can't handle it.
Yeah.
So you always get a computer system, a classical von Neumann machine, with very low information integration if you calculate the phi.
And you want that. So that's really ironical for people thinking that ChatGPT might become conscious. You don't want it to become conscious, because it might lose its intelligence in how you use it, in a sense.
At least the intelligence that we can impart on it with our limited ability to design things. Design, the key in design is to manage complexity through subsystems, through sub-blocks and clear interfaces. It turns out that if you actually design like that, which is the only way you can have a successful design, you're always keeping phi low.
That's so funny, yeah. Just to be very clear for people who want to understand sort of the difference between our brain and complex neural networks, because people really think, we call it neural networks, our brain is a neural network, that the two are somehow similar. We know these computers consist of gazillions of transistors that are highly connected. So what is the difference here?
When we say an artificial neural network running on a GPU, a graphics processing unit from NVIDIA, that's a digital artificial neural network. Now, the neural network part of the name refers to getting some inspiration from real biological neural networks. But that inspiration goes through vast steps of simplification. In digital artificial neural networks, which is what's running ChatGPT today, all the AI, all the agentic AI and language models that you see today are digital artificial neural networks. We make oversimplifying assumptions, like we say a neuron, the axon of the neuron, which produces the output of the neuron, or carries the output of the neuron, that output is binary. It's either 0 or 1. The neuron is either firing or not firing. That's not how things actually work. A neuron goes through a continuous levels of potentials, and those potentials that are not 0 or 1, but everything in between, they have causal effectiveness as well. They do something. Another vast simplification we make is the number of neurons. Even though digital artificial neural networks have lots of neurons and require thousands of GPUs, we are nowhere near what's actually going on in the brain. In the brain, you can have one neuron with tens of thousands of synapses to other neurons, each one of them carrying an analog active potential, not a digital 0 and 1 coming from one axon. And even more recently there has been evidence that a hypothesis put forward by Stuart Hameroff many years ago, that the microtubules, which are basically the skeleton of a cell, even a neuron, those microtubules have a kind of a crystalline structure that can sustain quantum states, coherent quantum states. And people ignored that or poo-pooed that for a long time because the brain is wet and hot, and you can't preserve a coherent state in an environment like that. But new evidence suggests that that's precisely what happened, that the microtubules can sustain coherence even over macroscopic distances, encompassing many neurons. If that is so, the amount of integrated information in the brain goes well beyond synapses.
Crazy.
These coherent states can lead to cosmic levels of information integration, something we are nowhere near to even becoming vaguely comparable to that. So even if that doesn't hold, a digital artificial neural network is a vast simplification of what's happening in the brain.
Yeah, and the same will go for quantum computers when we get to sort of, how many qubits are they now?
Yeah, a few thousand.
Yeah, exactly. But then still, even if we get to that, then the integration between those qubits.
Oh, it's little. The quantum gates only bring a few qubits together. Yeah. The qubits are supposed to be completely separate in order to maintain their superposition state. They're completely isolated. That's the difficulty in creating a quantum computer. And the way they come together is through this quantum logic gates, and there are only a few of them. So now quantum computer is even worse, and integrate even less stuff. We are at the level of Lego. No, we are nowhere near. Even if Stuart Hameroff's hypothesis of superposition states in microtubules, even if that's not true, the difference between biology, which we modeled through what we call spiking neural models, these are incredibly complex models of what comes through the axon of a neuron. Vastly complicated models. Yeah. What we are doing just says what comes out of an axon is either 0 or 1. This is ridiculous. Yeah. This is not at all what's actually happening. What's actually happening is vastly more complicated in terms of information integration, in terms of causal influences going back and forth, sideways, up and down. We call it an artificial neural network because, we have that structure of, the dendrites and the axons. It's inspired in nature, but it in no way comes even close to the information integration you have in a biological neural network.
And do you think that IIT is near a consciousness test? So we have the Turing test, which you can already sort of debate for intelligence, but for consciousness we have nothing, right? So could IIT lead to sort of a consciousness test?
I think within life, it is it's the only game we have in town to detect, for instance, whether someone is in a truly vegetative coma or is suffering from locked-in syndrome, that the consciousness is intact, but it can't control the body. So the person looks like he's vegetating, but it's not. Yeah. IIT has informed the development of technology that can tell doctors whether you are in locked-in syndrome or not. And the importance of that cannot be overestimated.
And it does so by taking a sample, because measuring just also for viewers to understand, measuring the phi of our brain is that's like already impossible, right? As of yet.
The practical limitation of IIT is that IIT is only as good as the resolution of the data you feed it. IIT is a model.
Yeah.
But you can feed it with information from different levels of granularity. You can feed it with bold levels, or the activation. Bold is a proxy for brain activity. It has to do with the oxygen level. You can feed very rough resolution functional MRI scan information about what is more active than what. Very coarse resolution. You feed that into IIT, you get an answer, but the answer is just as good as the poor resolution of the data you fed it with. Or you can implant tiny needles inside your brain so you can pick up the activation of a single axon, which then spreads out to 10,000 synapses, but you can pick up that activation of a single axon. Very high resolution data. But how many axons can you measure that way? It's 1 in a million, because you can't put needles everywhere. So you get very, very high resolution data, but very poor spatial sampling. In the ideal world, you would be able to feed IIT with information at the lowest granularity level, or the highest granularity level, the smallest feature, which could be even what's happening inside the microtubule. Today, we can't measure that. So IIT is just as good as how much we can measure. So what they do in practice today to check whether somebody is vegetative or locked-in syndrome, instead of simply passively measuring, and this is a very smart thing that they have done, Marcello, Giulio, Christof, and they even setting up a company to commercialize this. It's incredibly smart what they are doing. Instead of passively measuring, they insert the electrodes, and then they send a pulse to that electrode, and they measure how the brain tissue around it responds. And by looking at that signal response with the low granularity of stimuli, you can have a fairly accurate representation of whether the person is conscious or not. And you can see that on the screen. Now, for each electrode, you see the response. If the response is a little oscillation, that doesn't integrate much information. But if it goes like this, there's a lot of information to
this is something you would not sort of see in an fMRI or a different way of scanning. So it's really truly novel way.
An fMRI is passive. It just measures a proxy for brain activity, like the amount of oxygen going in different parts of the brain. This is active. You're sending a pulse into the brain and checking how the brain responds. And based on that response, you can take that response as data, run it through an IIT algorithm, the latest IIT 4, maybe there's IIT 5 coming down the pike, and you can have a measurement of phi. And you know what baseline phi is, so you can tell this person is conscious.
Which is much better than how we now test it. It's like purely on behavior, right? It would be like a doctor with what sort of classical stuff we have, pointing a light in your iris and sort of hitting your knee, just testing reflexes, and then we don't see anything. Conclusion, low or no consciousness.
That only measures whether your conscious states are connected with the rest of the body.
But you could have a rich inner life
without any of that.
And we could unplug. It could be that
you're killing someone.
Yeah, exactly. So ethically, this has such huge implications.
It's worse than that. The worst thing is you don't unplug, but you treat the person as a vegetative patient. Can you imagine the solitude, the boredom, the torture, which it is to be left for dead and not dying?
That's the importance of this work and the beauty of it. And you've called sort of also in praise of IIT that this might be the first theory of the noumena. So, which is quite a big thing to say, Bernardo, because it puts it sort of beyond physics in a sense. I thought, okay, are you now saying that IIT can break out of the dashboard of reality? You are saying that?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Explain.
Yeah. So what IIT does as a scientific theory, which has metaphysical implications. They happen to be idealist implications in my view, but let's ignore that. It's a scientific theory. It was developed based on science. It so happens that it may have metaphysical implications, but it was not driven by metaphysics. As a scientific theory, what IIT does is it correlates the two sides of the equation we have. We have inner experience. Through introspection, we know how it feels to be us. And we have measurements of brain activity. So as you are undergoing an experience, you can be instrumented with an EEG cap or an MEG, or they can put you inside an fMRI brain scanner. So they can measure the patterns of brain activity you have as you're experiencing something. And then they have these two sources of data, the brain scans, functional brain scans on the one hand, and on the other hand, subjective reports from introspection. I am telling you what I'm experiencing. What IIT does is to build a bridge between these two sides, is to build a bijective function that links the two. So if you have enough examples of the two sides, you can refine that bridge and come to a point where you can infer one side from the other. Of course, you have to see enough instances of both sides in order to refine the bridge. But once you have it, so you know how you move from one side to the other, if one side is not available, you can infer it. So you get to a point where I can report an experience to you, and using IIT, you will be able to predict what my patterns of brain activity will be.
But what's very important here is to see how this is different from Musk's Neuralink and the neural correlates that also now are able to, they can also pretty accurately say, but this is different, right?
Well, in Neuralink, what they're trying to do is the brain control of things, and the other way around. They're trying to bridge the external world to the brain. This is different. This is a model. This is a bridge for. It's a theoretical bridge. It's not to get you to control your video game just by thinking of it. It's about being able to infer brain activity from reported experience and experience from brain activity. It's to have a theoretical model that can bring you from one side to the other.
And to create sort of the first truly accurate map of qualia.
It is not going to be a complete map, in my view, because I don't think brain activity tells you everything there is to know about your conscious inner life, because I don't think the dashboard is complete.
Okay. But as far as we can get.
As far as we can get, I think IIT is by far the best game in town, as far as a theoretical model that allows you to reconstruct one side from the other. Now, we do that with living humans because only with living humans do we get the reports from introspection. Your cat's not going to report.
No.
And the black hole is not going to report what it is like to be the black hole. The inanimate universe is not going to tell you what it is like to be the inanimate universe. So we are epistemically limited there. We have to stick to people. But if you then understand that there is nothing special about people and the matter that forms our body, than the rest of the matter that constitutes the inanimate universe, what you can do is the following. You refine the model based on people's experiential reports and people's brain activity. You refine that model, having the two sides. Once that model is refined and you nailed it, now you can start extrapolating it to things that are not people. And if idealism is right, in the inanimate universe, in and of itself, nominally, is constituted of mental states, and physicality is just a dashboard representation in us of those mental states, then IIT allows us to go from the dashboard to the noumenal, from the phenomena to the noumena. Because that's what it does with us. In our case, the phenomena is the subject. The phenomena is the patterns of brain activity.
Let me just check if I get this. So, you see, because then if you have one part of the equation, you can then say this was the taste of garlic. This snapshot of the integrated information. I'll just say that for to just get this across, like a snapshot of the system at a certain moment, not its computation. So not its computation.
No, it's
output.
a snapshot.
It's a snapshot of the integrated information at a certain moment in time. This was garlic, and now you're saying that we could take a snapshot of the universe.
We can't because the universe is not going to report.
No.
But look,
but then we can infer maybe.
Correct. We can extrapolate. Look, in the case of people, the phenomena are the patterns of brain activity. Is what I can see from the outside. The noumena, only you have access to. But you can tell me what it is.
Yeah.
You can tell me what it is like to be you at a certain moment in that snapshot.
Yeah.
So for you, I have the phenomena and the noumena.
Yeah.
The noumena, you tell me the phenomena I measure.
Yeah.
In the case of the universe is not telling me anything. I only have the phenomena.
Yeah.
But if I refine the model with you, because from you I do have the noumena, I can infer the noumena of the rest of the universe.
Check. But then we get to sort of this question. This brings me to sort of Koch's experience on 5-MeO, DMT, and DMT. He was sort of like in an ontological shock when we spoke to him a year ago. I think he's sort of landed again. But I mean,
was sitting right here.
Yeah, right there. Yeah, right there. And asked him I asked him if IoT could make sense of that experience, and he had a hard time of sort of saying yes it can, because he said I need a substrate. I had this experience of being one with the universe. That's just a noumena, a phenomenal experience of being one with the universe. And if you now want me to sort of, if I want to make sense of that, I need a substrate, and I don't regard the universe as a whole as a substrate. What would your answer be?
First, I'll give you my perspective as a philosopher, and then I'll bridge that to where I think Christof is. We spent a week together when he was sitting here.
So you know more than I do.
Non-stop. In my view, physical stuff is appearance. So my patterns of brain activity are physical, and they are merely the appearance of my conscious inner life. They are what my conscious inner life looks like when observed from the outside. And of course, appearances don't need to be complete. You have an appearance of me right now. You don't see what's under my clothes. You don't see the details of my metabolism. You don't see what is on my back. You can infer a lot about me. If I am crying right now, you would pick it up that I am sad. The appearance does reveal important stuff about how I am feeling from within. But not everything. So under analytic idealism, the physical world doesn't need to tell us everything there is to know about the noumenal world, things as they are in themselves. Patterns of brain activity also don't need to reveal everything there is to know about how the owner of the brain is feeling.
If it's more coarse-grained view, can also give you sort of a...
it's more coarse-grained. It may not be complete. And not everything there is to know about how I'm feeling may be discernible in patterns of brain activity. Again, because unlike causes, appearances don't need to be complete. If the brain is the cause of consciousness, then there cannot be anything about consciousness that you can't find back in the brain. If the brain is the cause, it has to be complete. But if it's a mere appearance, no appearance in the world is complete. Why would patterns of brain activity reveal everything there is to know about the thing they are an image of? In other words, the feelings. That's why I think psychedelic experiences, which correlate with vastly reduced brain activity, with reduced brain activity, you can't expect to find correlates of the psychedelic experience in patterns of brain activity. It's a limited appearance. It's an appearance of the dissociation, and my hypothesis is that during psychedelic experiences, the dissociative boundary becomes porous and you reach beyond it. And you will not find that beyond in the appearance of the dissociation.
But does the phi go up? Does the integrated information go up within the brain on these substances?
There is less brain activity, but there is more there's more synchronization across different areas of the brain. Not necessarily. You'd have to run the numbers, because the part of the brain that has the potential for most information integration is the posterior hot zone here. And the default mode network, where you have the reduction of brain activity, it does not map one-to-one onto that. It goes into the prefrontal cortex and other areas. So you'd have to run the numbers.
But when you say, just sort of this sort of maybe might be a sort of a side note, but when you say appearances don't have to be complete, so it could be that the appearance of universal, of having a sense of being one with universal mind, the appearance of that is someone laying on a mat, just having drank a cup of psychedelic tea. That's the appearance of it.
No, look, your question.
I don't mean this as a joke.
No. I understand you. No, look, your previous question was: does integrated information increase during
Yeah.
the psychedelic state or not? And my answer to you, well, we would have to run the numbers.
Yeah.
But a better question would have been, could it increase enough to account for the psychedelic experience? And then the answer is the categorical no. No, you will not find enough. And Christof knows that. That's why he didn't answer your question. So for me, the substrate is not wholly in the sense that I don't expect it to be complete. So I'm epistemically more... I have lesser expectations epistemically of the substrate because I don't regard it as something that necessarily needs to be complete. Yeah. So I'm perfectly happy regarding as entirely natural possibility that somebody is tripping to parallel dimensions and talking to aliens and understanding the key to life, the universe, and everything with no more fight than one normally has, and perhaps less. Because I don't expect the substrate to reveal everything there is to know about the person's inner state, especially when it's a less dissociated state, because brain activity is the image of the dissociative outer. But now think about it from Christof's perspective.
Yeah, he would. He would see this as a cop out if you say stuff like this. Hey, I'm a scientist. Okay, now I've lost you.
Exactly.
Here's the philosopher talking. So okay,
it's the philosopher talking. Well, I can't change logic. Logic tells me that this is perfectly reasonable, right? That you don't expect an image to be complete. And I can't help it. I wish it were not the case. But through logic and empirical experience, I cannot say otherwise. Why would the bloody image need to be complete if it is an image, right? But now think of it from the perspective of a scientist. A scientist, unlike a philosopher, deals only with empirical data. That is the input to every scientific theory. Because a scientific theory doesn't arise out of a vacuum. A scientific theory is an attempt to account for certain observations. That's how the whole thing starts. So for a scientist, whether the image is complete or not, the image is all he has. He can't do science without the image. And then comes Bernardo Kastrup and says, well, but the image is not complete. Yeah, fine, very well, very good. But what can I do? What experiment can I run? What hypothesis can I test? You see? Now, that is a limitation of the scientific method. And it's an important limitation because that's what makes the scientific method reliable. But it is a limitation of the method, not a limitation of reality. Reality is what it is, regardless of the limitations of the scientific method. You see?
Yeah, and I think Christof Koch is at this point, he knows the limits of IIT, and I think this is exactly what puzzles him. That maybe previously I wouldn't say he didn't see the limits. Any scientist knows that there's a difference between your model of reality and reality, but you still have high hopes, right? And I think this shocked him, this experience. But that's my take from.
When he says there has to be a substrate, the way I hear it, I don't know whether he would agree with this. I have to call him and ask. Maybe he'll be watching this and say, Bernardo, damn you.
and then we need the two of you sit down here and fight it out. Yeah.
But how I read him when he says, no brain, never mind. No substrate, no mind. What I hear is, no substrate, I can't do mind science. No substrate, there's nothing I can do. So what's the point? And that is correct.
Yeah, that's correct.
From a scientist's perspective, because of the limitations.
It's an epistemic conclusion you're making there.
It's as frustrating for a scientist as an ontological conclusion. I can tell you an anecdote of how this... there was once... I was at CERN and I was 22, 23 years old, mid to late 90s. And I was very young and idealist. And we were working to discover the Higgs boson, right? Build an accelerator, the Large Hadron Collider. I was working in the ATLAS experiment, which is one of the two big experiments in the ATLAS, and particularly in the data acquisition part. And the whole point was to measure the Higgs boson. And once I was talking to my boss, who was my mentor, father figure for me, a physicist called Rudy Bach, who regrettably died 10 years ago. I was talking to him and I was saying, now the previous generation accelerator, the LEP, which is in the same tunnel as the LHC is today. It was still on when I was there. We had to shut it down to build the LHC, but when we were designing the LHC, the LEP was still running. And we, in the grapevine, we heard that they had measured the Higgs boson already. Had been measured. So I was like, Rudy, why all this obsession with the Higgs boson? We are doing this to find SUSY supersymmetry, which was the thing that we did not have any experimental evidence for. There was something. We didn't have the statistics, but we had seen some events that were consistent with the Higgs. You always get something, right? And I thought, why don't we just bite the bullet? We are doing this to find SUSY, to find supersymmetry. It's not for the Higgs boson. He looked at me very seriously and said, without statistics, it does not exist. Which is, if you don't have the empirical data, then it's not there. Well, it was there.
And how did they know without empirical data that it was there? Then?
Well, we had the empirical data, but we didn't have statistics. So it could be attributed to noise or just one of those things. Who knows?
But the consensus among the physicists there was already that you guys had found the Higgs boson.
No, it was not consensus, because many physicists would say you only have a discovery when you pass 3 sigma, which is, 3 sigma.
But your intuition, if you would ask them all over a glass of beer, most of them would say we found it.
Yeah, there's a little bump in the energy histogram. This right in the energy range where we expect the Higgs to be.
All that length you have to go through then. And then all that hard work. Unbelievable. Yeah.
Well, people like me, we did it for SUSY. we didn't do it for the Higgs. Yeah. The Higgs was so well theoretically constructed that it's like, it had to be there, all right?
Yeah.
For me, the whole point was,
so it was also
SUSY there.
And it was a sure bet to spend all that money, because you guys knew that you probably would find it.
I was not a politician, so I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah.
But the point is, without the data, it doesn't exist. So philosopher Bernardo Kastrup can talk about the substrate being incomplete, and therefore the psychedelic experience is there, but it's not in the data. For a scientist, it's like Rudy looked me in the eye and said, without the data, it does not exist.
Yeah, I get it,
Unless you cross 3 sigma, it does not exist.
Yeah, so you have high hopes, right, on where IIT is going.
Yes, because IIT, in my mind, is the first theory of the noumenal.
Yeah.
And foundations of physics are reaching a point where a hypothesis about what the noumenal is the only way forward. Otherwise, we think the noumenal and the physical are the same thing.
Yeah.
And therefore, physical stuff is the only thing that can be measured, but physical stuff only appear after measurement. What do you do now? So you have to have a theory of the noumenal to proceed in physics. And guess what the only game in town is? It's IIT.
Yeah,
and both are based on information. Foundations of physics is based on information theory. IIT is based on information theory.
Yeah, and at this moment in time, to conclude, I think it's the more important. We started off this talk about Chris's work and that graph between consciousness and intelligence. And when people start sort of attributing or projecting consciousness onto AI, we need a scientific theory that can help us sort of distinguish fact from fiction. That's what I find really important, sort of ethically in society.
Yeah, that's why Christof is involved in our AI initiatives as well. We need a voice of reason to tell the world that we have no reason to think of AI as conscious. And this, to me, you know me personally, you know how important this is to me. AI is a great opportunity and a great threat. Because if we think AI is conscious, like we are, then we think of ourselves as mechanisms.
Yeah.
And that is a catastrophe.
Yeah.
And all these academic discussions popping up now out of the woodwork, the ethics about how to deal with AI, I find it insulting.
Yeah.
No, there's still children starving, and you're telling me how I should ethically treat AI?
Yeah.
A mechanism? An abacus?
Yeah.
A sophisticated abacus, but an abacus nonetheless. This pisses me off. So I think, people like me and Christof and a few others whose names you know, we need to create a beachhead for ourselves in AI, because that's where the metaphysical discussion is going to go. It's going to go under the umbrella of AI.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a presence in AI that forces people to listen to what you have to say, we may go to hell in a handbasket.
Thanks, Bernardo, for sharing this. And just sort of, we promise sort of to our viewers to sort of, or I promise, it's just my analysis that sort of in physics, in biology, in neuroscience, we see this shift, this paradigm shift happening. Now, of course, Christof Koch is not, he doesn't represent the whole field of neuroscientists. He's a renowned neuroscientist, but IIT still, of course, is also, has sort of like in the last year or 2 years ago, became a bit more controversial. I mean, how do you see the whole field of neuroscience? Would you say that still Christof represents sort of just a minority of the field of neuroscience?
Oh, no, IIT. There are two sort of dominant theories of consciousness in neuroscience today. There's global workspace theory and IIT. And IIT is superior, not only in terms of how far along they are in instrumenting the theory, coming up with the equations, the precise predictions. They are miles ahead of global workspace theory in terms of how precisely they can predict things, how well instrumented the theory is. There has also been a recent adversarial collaboration in which representatives from both theories agreed beforehand on an experiment that could distinguish the two, and IIT won that. So if anything, IIT is more dominant now than it has ever been. And a nice sign of that is that the losers wrote a letter decrying IIT as pseudoscientific.
Yeah.
Why? Because IIT starts from the qualities of experience that we can discern introspectively, which is incredibly natural. If you want to explain consciousness, you need to first describe what it is that you're trying to explain.
It's crazy.
You need to start with the thing that you're trying to account for, so you account for that and not something else. But according to the letter, it's pseudoscience because it starts from what consciousness looks like, from introspection. I mean, it's crazy stuff. So when you see scientists or people who should be scientists applying a blow below the waistline,
didn't Kuhn predict
like
that already is a sign?
It's a sign of despair.
A sign of despair, exactly.
Yeah, it's people who are on the losing side, and they know it, and they're losing funding.
Yeah, so that's just very cool to see the shift happening in biology and neurosciences. And really, as my ending sort of cliffhanger, because I like to go more in depth into AI, you have been working on a new AI company, Syncthetics, of which you were CEO, I should say.
As of right now, I am still, but soon I shall not be.
And then you'll become
fingers crossed.
Scientific
in a couple of days.
Yeah. And I know personally how much work, nightly hours, apart from being director of Essentia Foundation, which is also a full-time job, you've been putting into that. And just want to ask you as a person why you went to such length to. I mean, you have had a rich career already at ASML as an engineer. Why did you go to all this length?
Well, I'll give you the politically correct and true answers, and then I'll give you another answer. The idea for Syncthetics came from the direction of Essentia Foundation. Yeah. One of our directors, called Avert, he pulled me to the side one day after a board meeting, and he said, AI is exploding, and all this conversation about, is AI conscious or not, and a series like Black Mirror portraying artificial consciousness uploading. And he thought this is how the metaphysical discussion in which we play, which we were founded to influence as Essentia Foundation, this is where that metaphysical discussion is going. And he looked at me and said, you have always done multiple things in your life. Shouldn't we, but you start something in the area of AI, and I went ahead and did it. So Syncthetics is not legally related to Essentia Foundation, but if you look at the people involved, there are names that are related or are associated with Essentia Foundation. It's legally completely separate. It's not a foundation. It's a for-profit company. Yeah. Without that, you don't get funding. And the idea was, if the metaphysical discussion that the Essentia Foundation was founded to influence, if that discussion is going to move under the umbrella of AI in the cultural dialogue, which is already happening. It's AI that's leading to questions like, what is mind? Is an AI minded? What's the difference between me and ChatGPT? Now, that's exactly the discussion we were founded to influence. If that moves under AI, but we don't have a foothold in AI, we are looking into AI from the outside, then people can always say, well, what do these philosophers know about AI? They are not involved. Computer engineering has gone far, far since Bernardo got his PhD in 2001. What does Bernardo know of latest computer engineering? He's outdated. No, if he says it's not conscious, we can't take seriously because he doesn't know. 20 years in technology is an eternity, right? So who cares what Federico Faggin, Bernardo Kastrup, Stephen Schumann, who care what they say? They don't know. They're not involved. We have to talk to the bosses that are involved, right? So he figured, fine, then we get involved. And we will do hardware, not software.
Hardware.
Because hardware is what exists, right? Software is a pattern of information in hardware, right? It's what drives hardware. But what is actually happening is always hardware. Only hardware states exist. Software is an abstraction that we create. Only hardware states exist. There is nothing to a computer but hardware and its states. Software is pure abstraction. It's important abstraction, but it's abstraction. So he thought, let's do that. Let's try to be the best AI hardware in the world. So 5 years from now, when Christof Koch, Bernardo Kastrup, Federico Faggin say, it's not conscious, nobody can ignore us if we are the ones behind the hardware.
Okay, so you're now all in.
Yeah, but look, it's not the first time I do that.
I know.
I got a second PhD because years ago somebody said, why should I listen to you? You're a PhD in computer engineering. What do you know about philosophy? It's an ad hominem attack, but I think some ad hominems are valid. I'm not against all ad hominems. So I thought, this is a good ad hominem. I take it to heart. 2 people said that. Why should I listen to you? You're a PhD in computer engineering, and you're doing philosophy now. Why should I listen to you? And I thought, okay, I spent 3 years writing technical papers in philosophy in mainstream journals, peer-reviewed journals, and then I got my second PhD. So I have a history of going to lengths to make a point if I think the criticism is valid. And I think the potential future criticism, Bernardo, your PhD is from 2001. Your PhD in computer engineering. The philosophy one is 2019. Bernardo, your relevant PhD is from 25 years ago. Why should I listen to you? I take that to heart. So I will show why they should listen to me.
You said you had 2 reasons, so you just gave me the first reason, which has to do with just be legitimate in this field of AI and consciousness. What is the second one?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to do this. It's a whole lot of fun to do this. I feel like I'm 26 years old again.
In your attic at night.
Yeah, because I was 26 years old when I founded my first company together with friends who are with me again with Syncthetics. We founded Silicon Hive back in 2002. Now it was sold to Intel many years ago. So now I am 50 and I'm doing that again with the same people.
That's cool.
The same partners.
That's cool.
So I feel like I'm 26 again. It's a whole lot of fun. That alone would justify it.
Really cool, Bernardo. And it reminds me that, and that's my concluding remark for this great conversation, that Christof Koch said here, so we need to see where the rubber meets the road, sort of that hardware approach. So what I really hope in following Syncthetics, bit from the sideline, of course, but I'd love to report on it once it gets relevant for Essentia, is that it might indeed give us a better understanding of what AI truly is and is not, to help people sort of just sift through fact and fiction here. So thanks for sharing that, and we'll tell you more about that when it becomes relevant. Bernardo, thanks very much for this broad-ranging discussion we've had. I'd love to do more of those sort of when I get back with new videos. And you, thanks for watching, and see you on one of our next videos. Thank you so much.